I recently put out a post to our members asking for all sorts of questions so I could do a question and answer session. I normally like to do these live, but I've been finding that time is a little bit precious and tight, and so early in the morning here before the sun rises, I have a little window to address some questions. I was pleasantly surprised. There were over 40 really amazing questions that the members submitted. I'm going to try my best to answer at least a good number of them in this session. Maybe I'll do a second video to address more. So if you are a member and you submitted a question and I missed it, please forgive and understand. I'll do this again if there's interest and if people enjoy it. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go ahead and pick some questions that people submitted and answer them to the best of my ability. In the description, I'll try to break down with timestamps the different questions so that if you have specific interests, you can bop around. So hopefully this is of value to some folks. This is a question from Anna. Homegrown chicken feed for autumn and winter months is something I'd like to know more about. What do you grow for the hens? How do you store it? And how do you serve it to them? Amaranth is something I'm particularly interested in. I would love to hear experiences. Yeah, it's a great question. We tried to grow a bunch of sunflower this year. We have a bunch that's dried. I don't know that I would necessarily, in growing the sunflower, drying it down, processing it, storing it in containers, then I realize I can buy a 50-pound sack from a local farmer for $25. It's hard to make an argument to want to grow a bunch of grain that we then process to be similar to what we could buy. I think in the future, growing full heads of sunflower, full heads of sorghum, amaranth, and drying them, providing that in the coop in the winter months, that could be an interesting pathway to explore. I think the most value we can do as far as offering food to the hens in the winter is what we've talked about extensively in the videos of soaking whole viable seed and putting it out in the warm composting systems. Allowing those seeds to sprout. That works incredibly well. I think a lot of the brassicas that we'd want to grow for our own consumption in the winter, like radishes and the like, we can cut the leaves off of those in the fall, add them into leaves that are all throughout the chicken yard, and those tend to be there for quite a while. We're coming into early December and there's still lots and lots of brassica leaves and trimmings from fall harvest. So thinking through the hardy, cold growing greens that we want anyway, the chards, the kales, the clean break of those older leaves as greens for the hens throughout the winter. And if we're going to be doing more grains, to do it in a simpler, less formalized way, like not growing them, processing them off the stalk, but just whole heads of sunflower, whole heads of sorghum, maybe corn on the stalk bundled up in the coop, and then we can give it to them in the winter. So that's my thinking on that. Bree asks, how do you get so many wood chips? Do you use chip drop or do you have relationships with arborists? I feel like I see a lot of wood chips wanted in the Finger Lakes area, so they're in high demand. Yeah, it's a great question. The way we get chips in our system is relationships. I've got some friends that do tree work, so that's very, very helpful, but also making calls to arborists. Less of the, I feel like chip drop is fine, but it's a little bit passive. I feel like a lot of people use that, and so it doesn't necessarily, there's more competition. I think making calls directly to tree companies and asking for chips is a pretty viable way to build that relationship. Making sure you tip the people that dump chips. I like to do at least $10, $20 feels really nice. The value is very high for me, so offering $20, even if they're just the driver, they're not the owner of the company, feels like it keeps them flowing. We have some really good relationships with folks that do arborist work in our area, and I provide a long-term trade of food forest trees to my friend Keith. If you're watching this, hello Keith, in exchange for a nice flow of chips whenever it's convenient for them. So it's those sorts of relationships. I also feel like just if you hear someone chipping off in the distance, I just pull over. If I see people cutting trees, I'll sometimes tuck in for a moment, wait for a safe break in their work, and then chat with whoever's doing the chipping. Hey, do you ever need a place to dump? Here's my cell phone number, or can I get your card? and that's been pretty helpful and has worked nicely. Tom Collier asks, how do you speak so clearly and concisely on camera? Do you script at all? Do you think about what you mean to say before pressing record? Do you do multiple takes? I do multiple takes sometimes. I've got an interesting way of dealing with most of the videos. Well, you've probably noticed this if you watch the channel a fair bit. The videos tend to be shots taken while actively doing the work. Like I basically wipe my hands off, I pull a phone out, I take a short shot, put it back in my pocket, go back to my work, or I walk around and take a longer form document of what happened in the day. I think in that scenario, the thoughts are actively in my mind as to what I would want to say and how I'd want to say it. So I do think about it. There have been many videos where I intended to make a video. I went to take a shot, it didn't work, took another attempt at it, didn't work, and by the third one, if it doesn't really click and come together, I just give up. I go back to what I'm doing and forget about it. Yeah, I don't think, we never make scripts for things. It either comes together or it doesn't. And I feel like, right at this point, I think this channel has had almost 1,000 videos. It's kind of ridiculous. I've just been making them over and over and over again. And so there feels like there's a natural flow to it that starts to happen over time. And I guess I'm always thinking about the topics that show up in these videos. I'm thinking about the chicken composting. I'm thinking about food forest design and guilds and all that kind of work. So it would make sense that when I start talking about it, it kind of flows in a natural way. So I think that's how it all comes together. Hopefully that addresses that in a flowy sort of way. Brian asks, any new nursery offerings like autumn olive? I think you're trying to trick me with that one. We have lots and lots of new plants that we're working with, some that will be available through the website, some will be local offerings. Autumn olive, I absolutely adore autumn olive, and I've talked about that before. It's been some of the most controversial videos I've put out are about sharing how much I appreciate and enjoy autumn olive. But no, it's illegal for me to offer that plant through the nursery, so I don't. There are some great nurseries out there that come to mind, like Burnt Ridge Nursery and Planting Justice, and some others that have that, if that's what you're interested in. Plants that we'll be offering, Sochan will be one. I don't remember the Latin name right now, but it's a Rudbeckia, super hardy perennial, green, incredibly aggressive, powerful, native perennial vegetable. Really exciting plant. We may offer that in the spring, but probably more like in the fall. I'm trying to understand how to propagate perennial kale in a way where we can offer cuttings that people can root themselves. We may dip a toe in offering sea berry cuttings. We don't have enough plants right now, but cuttings could be something in the spring that people with bottom heat propagation setups could work with. There might be some more varieties of willows down the line. I should be offering some more cutting varieties of elderberry and maybe currants this spring. Maybe that's it. Oh, we've got tons of figs that are going in a high tunnel. This winter I'll take cuttings and root them, and then in the fall, for warmer climate folks, we'll be able to offer rooted cuttings of figs if they work for us. So yeah, I know I'm missing some things. Wapato might be in there, Minari, some more aquatic plants if we can figure out the logistics of timing for when they're lifted and shipped. So we'll just keep expanding new plants. If you've got plants that you think we really ought to know about in our system, feel free to let us know, and we'll try to track them down. Or if you want to send some material and trade, we can explore that too. But no autumn olive in a formalized way. We'll just keep planting them in our own landscape and enjoying their nitrogen fixation and anti-cancer beauty. Nice question from Trumpeting Angel. Hello there. In regards to, first time winter gardener here and wondering about harvesting. Do they grow at all from now on? So it's kind of a subjective question, or specific to your spot. I think you might be not too distant from us as far as climate in cold New York State, cold winter, warm summer. Am I going to be able to pick and eat during the winter? or is the point to have it early in the spring? Hard to answer this question in a very accurate, specific way of like, yes, it's by this date and this amount. More general, since the question feels somewhat general. I'm just learning as we go. We probably all are here. What we've found is that in high tunnels or season extension spaces, timing is really key. If you can get plants established August, September, October in a warmer space, like right now we've got a whole bunch of lettuces and a whole bunch of parsley, perennial kale, and some annual kales in the larger high tunnel in our neighbor's yard. We can kind of coast on that and nibble throughout the winter. Active growth is pretty much not going to happen as far as I can tell. Maybe with some compost heating, we can trigger some real growth happening. But by and large, the plants sit still. So whatever amount they were able to grow up until this time of year, this cold, low light, low temperature time, what you were able to facilitate growing till now is what you get to eat through the winter. If you're careful with the plants and the way you harvest, clean break on the kale, scissors and not dirty fingers on the lettuces, then we've observed February, March, as the light energy starts to increase, they really take off and grow for a while, and then they bolt, and you can either get seed or pull them out and swap for summer crops. But it's about sowing the plants at the appropriate time, late summer, early fall, getting season extension cover over them for the winter, and nibbling and expecting a good early spring push. I'm going to try to get the high tunnel, the larger high tunnel, really dialed in for this winter so we can hit the ground running in the spring. And as that happens, I'll be sure to share notes with folks. Got a compelling question from Jill here in regards to when do you give up on a plant that's not performing well? You can read the details there, but I've got Jonker vertets and Jonker vertets red currant and ranch elderberry not thriving with other plants right near them. Do you give up on them? Do you pull them out? It's a great question. I kind of feel like if you have the room in your garden space, if you have the bandwidth, give them a chance. I would say, what does it look like to add more compost around those plants? Add more mulch? Do you want to make compost tea and see how that works? Do you want to add companion plants, a ground cover, fungal inoculated wood chips? Are there ways to support those plants? Those sorts of endeavors may very well trigger a lovely response from the plants that were kind of languishing and sitting still, and have them take off. If they don't and they fully die, well, okay, they passed away and you've incredibly improved the soil there for whoever's next. I take a stance almost always with plants, rather than they have to prove that they're extremely vigorous and alive out of the gate or they get ripped out. My preference is to give a plant at least a year to prove to me that they're dead. So in other words, I might put a persimmon in that in the spring, they don't leaf out at all. They look completely dead. I leave them, I water them like everybody else, which is not much at all. I mulch them like everybody else, which is liberally when I can. And quite often, that dead-looking plant will resprout from the ground. They get inertia and they start growing in a nice way, and they take off and thrive. So, and sometimes they die, but like I said, the soil will have been in a better way to receive whoever's next. So I like that. It feels good to me. If you're doing this work in the spirit of being able to earn a living, and bed space is precious, or you've got very limited space, by all means, pull them out, start with another being and see what can happen. But there's something sweet about tending to plants that are languishing and kind of sitting still to see if you can help them. And then once they get up to speed, it feels really, really nice to have that relationship with them. That's my personal preference. A straightforward question from Julie Ann. What does winter prep on the beds look like in a busy life season? Dumping stuff on the bed as time allows. We have our chicken composting system, which generates just an immense amount of compost that I would never really describe as perfectly finished compost. It's somewhere between rich compost or unfinished compost and rich mulch. And that's my go-to, since we have that in abundance. Wherever there's bare soil or open space, maybe we lifted a bed of nursery plants from a garden bed and there's bare soil, wherever there's bare soil, I like to get cover on it. The chicken compost is nice. Maybe there's hay left over from mulching in the summer that's sitting in bales. I'd rather see it on the earth than in piles in bales. So long as we're not worried about vole pressure in that area, hay is great. Leaf bags are nice, although with our chickens, that's where it all goes, is into the chicken system. But maybe you don't have chickens and you can collect leaves. That makes an incredibly beautiful like temperature insulative cover, a way to really reduce erosion and pressure from rain and freeze-thaw cycles, and it invites worms up and into the leaves throughout the winter. It's really easy to pull it aside. So when in doubt, I feel like leaves are the nicest. You can generally get them where you are. But yeah, wood chips, compost, manure, whatever. Let winter work on it. The freeze-thaw cycles really help break things down, and you can either plant into it in the spring if it feels really ready and good to go, or simply move it aside to the edge of a bed, back to the soil that you know is ready, plant seed in, and then move that material back on. But there's no formalized, it has to be in this particular state or of this material, carbon, nitrogen, it's whatever I've got, to the best of my ability to cover beds as time allows. And if they don't get covered, it's not the end of the world, but the more bare soil you have in the more steep of a situation, if it's on a hillside with lots of precipitation in the winter, the more that those variables are a yes or increased, the more important it is to get cover on your soil. So if you have absolutely dead flat soil in a context where the winter is pretty mellow and gentle, I would stress less about it than where you're establishing gardens in hill country in a very wet winter sort of context. Govinda's Garden puts forward a technical question here around garden design. We're in western North Carolina and we have a bank sloped about 65 degrees on the west side of our yard. It extends about 200 feet long, is covered by kudzu and privet. What trees or shrubs do you think might be able to do okay in this setting? That is a challenging situation. My thoughts first go to swales and a little bit of earthworking. So if you're describing a very, very steep context, what does it look like to, is it with a mattock or a shovel, start actually shaping on contour, a digging out from upslope and depositing downslope of soil in order to start creating a little bit more physical infrastructure to hold soil and retain and distribute water within that. Kudzu, I don't have direct experience working with. Privet, I do. Privet is a very challenging plant to say no to or to move away from, but they're both compelling. They're both doing work of holding soil together. So I think my thoughts first go to who are the really assertive pioneer species plants that can hold together soil, like autumn olive and gumi, other nitrogen fixing shrubs and trees that might be appropriate in your area, like very fast growing woody perennials that can keep up with the kudzu and the privet. I probably would lean away from the idea of going through and trying to dig out every last privet and kudzu, and more just doing earthwork as time allows on contour, planting new plants into the berm you've just created that are fast growing, nitrogen fixing, woody perennials that are very hardy to your area, that can deal with dry conditions or wet conditions, and then the kudzu and privet throughout the growing season being in a management rhythm where after every good rain you go out with loppers or pruners and cut hard, flush to ground all the new green growth from those plants. Consider them a very abundant green manure that you can put around the trees and shrubs that you're trying to establish into that hillside. North Carolina is a very different growing context than New York State, so I can't give you an explicit list of it's these 10 plants, but it's those metrics, those attributes of that I just mentioned before would be the ones that would allow you to transition away from those plants, and considering them valuable green manure sources and soil holding tools in the meantime, respecting them and leveraging that growth could create, I think, a positive way of relating to that transition. Eve is asking a question in regards to Serviceberry. A couple of the Juneberries, Serviceberries, too many names, are getting taller than I can reach from the ground to pick the fruit. Can they be pruned to keep them shorter? Does it depend on which species or cultivar it is? There are some Juneberries out there. I think there's Amelanchier stolonifera and Amelanchier alnifolia that are both varietals or subsets of Serviceberry that tend to not get much taller than human beings. So you might consider looking into varieties like Northline and Smoky and Thiessen. They are production varieties that are easier to work with in the future. You probably have something more of like a tall shrub tree version of Serviceberry. To the best of my understanding, yeah, they're amenable to pruning. They're rose family, and just like other members of rose family, if you cut them back, probably it makes sense to cut them back late winter, early spring before they start growing. They should be able to regrow and produce nicely within 2 years or so of where you've made those cuts. But I'd also look into maybe thinking about those Serviceberry being allowed to grow a little bit more into their natural tree form and seeking out varietals that keep themselves where you can access them. So then some can be for the birds and for wildlife and others, and some can be for you without having to stress or manage too intensely. Burrow Hill Nursery asks, what are your thoughts, pros and cons of cold stratifying seeds directly in air prune boxes, perhaps with some additional insulation and rodent protection? Zone 6B, arid. Well, I just made a video recently documenting the experiment with bur oaks, Ashworth bur oak and another wild bur oak in air prune boxes planted in the fall. So this question came in just a little bit before that video was put out. So we'll see. It's not something I've done much at all, or if I can remember, I don't think I've done it at all. Tree seeds that are bigger, like chestnuts, hazelnut, hickory, are cold stratifying systems of putting them in the root cellar or burying them outside in our chicken yard has worked nicely for me. So I haven't strayed from that much. Maybe in the future I'll do more. I think finer, smaller seeds like your serviceberries, your mulberry, currants and gooseberries, you could try sowing those in the fall and see what they do. Zone 6B arid is a little bit different than Zone 5B and very, very moist. I think whatever you do, you'd want to make sure there's good rodent protection and some amount of insulation would be appropriate. Perhaps you're setting one box in motion with no insulation to see and one with some if you have an abundance of a particular type of seed. By and large, I think in general, the safest bet is to store seeds in a rodent protected context that allows for the seeds to be held near freezing but not much below. That gives very, very good results, I can say empirically, and the rest is an experiment. If you had some shagbark hickory that just dumped 1,000 pounds of nuts and you're swimming in them, cool, try every different thing and see what works best, and share notes with us. Let us know. If you're buying seeds for 50 cents a pop, cold stratify them in a protected way and plant in the spring would be my recommendation. We've got a question from Small Seeds in regards to Paw Paws. I won't read the whole thing. You can read it if you'd like. But basically they're asking, do Paw Paw seeds float when still viable? They have about 20 seeds and some are floating, and they're all floating. And normally that would mean that they're not viable. To be honest, I don't know that I've ever done a Paw Paw seed float test. Let's see. In cracking Paw Paw seeds open, they feel like little fatty floaters. They have a lot of airspace inside. It would not surprise me that every seed would float. Your suggestion that people mention that they've evolved to float down stream banks to better colonize new areas. Intuitively, that makes sense. In warmer climates, that they would land in the water, rot away from the fruit, float, get stuck in the muck, and sprout and grow. If all you have is 20 seeds, I would plant every last one of them. Back to a question from before, I like to think of every plant having possibility of growing. I would keep them moist and cool all winter. I would plant them out with hopes and anticipation of them growing and treat them as such and have that intent that they are viable and good. And I bet they will be. Other folks can share. One thing I know for sure, Paw Paw seeds, if you allow them to dry out, so if they go from black, which is when they're first fresh out of the fruit, and fully moist. If they sit out for a day or even many hours of a day and they turn a lighter brown, like a coffee with milk in it color, they're generally not viable anymore, and they really shouldn't freeze. So they're tricky in that way. Don't let them dry out, don't let them freeze. Other than that, I would try them. I bet most, if not all of those, will sprout for you. Last question here. I know I've missed a bunch, and I'm sorry for those of you that I missed. Maybe I'll do another one where I can go through and do a second round with these, or we'll solicit for more questions soon. But we've got Linda Young asking, question, what is the best, easiest way to propagate river locust? River locust is also a Morpha fruticosa. Fantastic early succession, wet appreciating nitrogen fixing plant. Beautiful shrub. Easiest is by seed, absolutely. They produce copious, obscene amounts of seed, and it feels like the stratification requirements are nil. I've collected seed from river locust in the fall, stored it dry, direct sowed in the spring, and it germinated. I feel like I've also collected seed in May that had been on the branches over winter, freeze-thaw cycles, everything, all winter, and direct sowed them with no scarification, no hot water bath, no treatment, and they all germinated and grew beautifully as well. So river locust is pretty easy from seed. I've heard from people that cuttings work really well. You can try that, of course, but if you know where you can get seeds from, I would try direct sowing them. I think, like with all nitrogen fixing woody perennials, it doesn't hurt if you have limited seeds to soak them in warm water to wake them up. And that's true of peas and beans and river locust, honey locust, black locust trees, as well as annuals. Warm water really helps wake up that germination process in a lot of the nitrogen fixers, but they're easy from seed. That is my first attempt at answering some questions from you lovely members. We appreciate everybody that's involved in the large virtual community that we have here with Edible Acres. Over 150,000 folks that have subscribed to the channel. It's phenomenal and unbelievable. Thank you all so much. I'm seeing daylight starting behind me, so I need to start getting ready for letting the chickens out. The wood stove needs some tending, and I should check in with Sasha and baby Zelda about their needs as well. So as time allows, I'll try to do more of these question and answer sessions in the pre-dawn moments when there's a good window and George is around. Thank you for bearing with this very filthy shirt. This is the reality of our life. I definitely will not dress up for anything I do. And yeah, again, thank you, members. If you really appreciate this channel and you want to support us directly, feel free to consider joining the membership. We like to offer up these sorts of small thank yous in the forms of answering your questions directly. If you would like to and you want to support us directly another way, there's a link in the description for a PayPal donation that can help us directly if you want to do that. If you want to watch our videos and ask questions and not do either of those things, that's fantastic too. It's lovely to have you with us. And it's off to the morning now. Thanks all. We'll do this again sometime soon. Take care.